Her words hit me like a slap across the face. Carol stood there in my kitchen with her arms crossed and a smirk curling her lips. "Sure. You've always been a glorified babysitter in uniform." "Right." My chest tightened and I felt the air get stuck in my throat. I just offered to watch my grandson Leo for the afternoon so she could have a break. I thought I was doing something kind. I thought I was helping. But that smirk, those words, they sliced through 68 years of my life, like a knife through paper. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there gripping the edge of the counter staring at her. My daughter-in-law, who I'd welcomed into my home, who I'd cooked for, who I'd tried to love like my own, she didn't even blink. She just turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me with the echo of her voice. Before I dive into this story, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment with where you're watching from. Your support means everything. I'm Michelle. I'm 68 years old. I live in Minnesota, and this is the story of how one sentence, one cruel, careless sentence, changed everything. I didn't know it then, but that moment in the kitchen was the beginning of the end. Not just for me and Carol, but for me and my son Christian, and for the life I thought I'd built. I've spent my life holding things together, soldiers, families, my own heart, but this time I couldn't. This time, it all fell apart. Let me take you back to that day. It was a Saturday in early fall. The air was crisp, but the sun was still warm. I'd driven over to Christian and Carol's house in St. Waded, Paul, about 20 minutes from my little place in Roseville. They'd invited me for lunch, and I was excited to see Leo, my 4-year-old grandson, who could light up a room with his giggle. I brought a batch of my homemade oatmeal cookies because Leo loved them, and I always tried to have something special for him. When I got there, Christian was in the living room watching a football game, and Leo was playing with his toy trucks on the floor. Carol was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for a salad. Everything felt normal, comfortable, like family. We ate lunch together and talked about small things. Leo's preschool, Christian's job at the auto shop, Carol's new yoga class. I noticed Carol was quieter than usual, but I didn't think much of it. She'd always been a little distant with me. Not cold exactly, but not warm either. I figured she was just tired. Raising a kid is hard, and I remembered those days well. After lunch, Christian took Leo outside to play in the backyard, and I stayed in the kitchen to help Carol clean up. That's when I made my offer. "Carol, if you ever need a break, I'd love to take Leo for an afternoon. Maybe you and Christian could have a date night or something." I smiled, trying to keep it light. I didn't want her to feel like I was pushing. That's when she said it. "Sure. You've always been a glorified babysitter in uniform, right?" Her tone wasn't playful. It wasn't a joke. It was sharp, like she'd been waiting to say it. I froze. My hands were still wet from rinsing dishes, and I felt the water dripping onto the floor. I looked at her expecting maybe an apology or a laugh to soften it, but she just raised an eyebrow and leaned against the counter. I wanted to ask her what she meant. I wanted to tell her about the years I spent in the Army as a logistics specialist, moving supplies under fire, saving lives in ways she'd never understand. I wanted to tell her about Kandahar, about the bombs, about the blood. But I didn't. I couldn't. My voice was gone. Instead, I reached into my purse, which was sitting on the counter. My fingers found the small, worn photo I always carried. It was me in my uniform, 26 years old, sitting in the back of a truck in Kandahar. I was holding a wounded soldier, a kid barely 19, his arm wrapped in bandages I'd tied myself. Bombs were falling in the distance, and you could see the dust and fear in our eyes. I pulled the photo out and set it on the counter without a word. Carol glanced at it, then looked away like it was nothing. "I'm going to check on Leo," she said, and walked out. I stood there alone in the kitchen, the photo staring up at me. My hands shook not from anger, but from something deeper. Shame, maybe. Or betrayal. I'd never felt so small. I'd spent my life being strong for everyone. My soldiers, my son, my grandson, and in one sentence, she'd reduced it all to nothing. I heard Christian's voice outside laughing with Leo, and I realized he hadn't heard any of it. He didn't know. And I didn't know if I could tell him. I didn't take Leo to the park that day. I couldn't. I mumbled some excuse about feeling tired and left before Christian could ask too many questions. When I got home, I sat on my couch in the dark, still in my jacket. The house was quiet, too quiet, and I kept hearing her words over and over. Babysitter, in a uniform. I thought about my life. The years in the army, the medals, the lives I'd helped save. I thought about raising Christian alone after his dad left when he was 5. The long hours, the sacrifices, the love I poured into him. I thought about the Veteran of the Year award hanging on my wall, the one the local VFW gave me last year. None of it mattered to her. And maybe it never would. The next morning I woke up to a text from Christian. Hey Mom, you okay? You seemed off yesterday. I stared at the screen for a long time. I wanted to tell him everything, but I didn't know how. He loved Carol. They'd been married 6 years, and she was the mother of his child. If I told him what she said, would he believe me? Would he take her side? I typed out a reply, I'm fine, just tired, and hit send. But I wasn't fine. I was breaking. Over the next few weeks, I tried to act normal. I went to Leo's preschool play and clapped louder than anyone. I invited Christian and Carol over for dinner and smiled through every awkward moment. But something had shifted. Carol didn't apologize, and I didn't bring it up. Every time I saw her, I felt that sting again. I started pulling back. I stopped offering to watch Leo. I stopped calling as often. Christian noticed. One day he showed up at my house alone, his truck parked crooked in the driveway like he'd rushed over. Mom, what's going on? You're acting weird. Did something happen? I wanted to tell him. I opened my mouth to say it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said, I'm just getting older, Christian. I need a little space. He looked at me like he didn't believe me, but he didn't push. He hugged me and left. That night I lay awake wondering if I'd made a mistake. Maybe I should have told him. Maybe I should have fought for my place in their lives. But I was tired. So tired. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Thursday, 3 months after the kitchen incident. I got a call from Carol out of the blue. Her voice was clipped like she was annoyed. Michelle, can you watch Leo tomorrow? I've got a work thing and Christian's stuck at the shop. He hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no to keep my distance. But I missed Leo. I missed his laugh, his sticky fingers, his endless questions. Sure, I said. Bring him over in the morning. The next day, Carol dropped Leo off at my house. She barely looked at me, just handed me his backpack and said I'll be back by 6. No thank you, no smile. I bit my tongue and focused on Leo, who was already running to my living room to dig out his favorite toy dinosaur. We had a great day. We baked cookies, went to the park, read his favorite book about trucks. For a few hours, I felt like myself again. But when Carol came to pick him up, everything fell apart. She walked in and saw the cookie crumbs on the counter. Really, Michelle, you're giving him sugar again. Her tone was sharp, like I'd committed a crime. I tried to stay calm. He had 1 cookie, Carol. He's fine. She rolled her eyes, and that's when it happened. She said, You know you're not his mom, right? You don't get to make those calls. You're just the babysitter. There it was again. Babysitter. The word that cut deeper than anything. I felt the room spin. Leo was in the corner playing with his dinosaur, oblivious to it all. I looked at Carol, and something in me snapped. Not in a loud way, but in a quiet, final way. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, Get out. She blinked, surprised for the first time. What she said. Get out, I repeated. Take Leo and go. She grabbed his backpack, scooped him up, and left without another word. The door slammed behind her. I stood in my living room, the silence deafening. My hands were steady now. I knew what I had to do. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out a small box from my closet. Inside was my Veteran of the Year medal, the photo from Kandahar, and a picture of Leo from his first birthday. I took them to the kitchen table. I added the spare key to Christian's house, the one he'd given me years ago. Then I wrote a note. It was short. Christian, I love you and Leo. But I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. I left the note on the table with the key, the medal, the photos. Then I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove away. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. Not in that house, not in that life, not with her words ringing in my ears. I drove north past the city limits, past the lakes, past everything I knew. My phone buzzed Christian calling, but I didn't answer. I turned it off and kept driving. The road stretched out ahead, empty and cold. Just like me. The first night I stopped at a motel off Highway 10, a small place with flickering neon lights and a clerk who didn't ask questions. I paid $40 in cash for a room that smelled like stale coffee and old carpet. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall, my bag still packed by the door. My phone was off, but I could imagine the missed calls, the texts from Christian, maybe even Carol. I didn't want to know what they said. I didn't want to hear his voice asking why or her voice pretending nothing happened. I just wanted to be gone. The next morning I got back in my car and kept driving. I ended up in Duluth by evening. The city spread out along Lake Superior like a postcard I didn't care about. I found another motel, this one cleaner, and checked in for a week. I used my savings to pay no questions, no explanations. I spent my days walking along the lakefront, bundled in my jacket against the October wind. I didn't think about home. I didn't let myself. But at night, when the room was dark and the lake was quiet, it all came rushing back. Carol's smirk. Christian's confused eyes. Leo's laugh. I'd close my eyes and see the photo from Kandahar. My younger self staring back at me, strong, fearless, saving lives. Who was that woman? Where did she go? A week into Duluth, I turned my phone on. 32 missed calls. 57 texts. Most from Christian, a few from old army friends, one from Carol. I didn't read hers. I couldn't. Christian's text started worried, then desperate, then angry. Mom, where are you? Please call me. What the hell is going on? I scrolled through them, my throat tight. The last one was from 2 days ago. I found your note. I don't understand. Please come home. I stared at it until the screen went dark. I didn't call him. I didn't text back. I turned the phone off again. I started working odd jobs to stretch my savings. I cleaned houses for a local agency, no background checks, just cash at the end of the day. The work was hard, but it kept my mind busy. I'd scrub floors and think about the army, about moving crates under gunfire, about keeping people alive. I'd dust shelves and think about Christian's first day of school, how he clung to my hand, then ran off with a grin. I'd vacuum and think about Leo's sticky fingers on my cheeks. But I never thought about Carol. I couldn't let myself. One day, I was cleaning a big house on the edge of town, and the owner, an older woman named Ruth, caught me staring at a photo of her grandson. She asked if I had kids. I nodded and said, "A son and a grandson." She smiled and asked their names. I told her Christian and Leo, and for the first time in weeks I felt something crack inside me. I excused myself to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub trying to breathe. Ruth didn't ask questions, but when I left, she slipped me an extra $20 and said, "You look like you're carrying something heavy. Don't let it break you." Her words stuck with me. That night, I sat in my motel room and wrote Christian a letter. Not an email, not a text, but a real letter on paper I bought at a drugstore. I told him I loved him. I told him I was proud of him. I told him I missed Leo every day. But I didn't tell him about Carol. I didn't tell him why I left. I didn't want him to choose between his wife and his mother. I sealed the letter and mailed it the next day, no return address. I didn't know if he'd read it. I didn't know if it would change anything. But it was all I could do. Months passed. I stayed in Duluth through the winter, the snow piling up outside my motel window. I kept cleaning houses, kept walking the lakefront, kept pushing forward, but I was hollow. I'd left everything behind: my home, my family, my medals, and for what? To prove a point, to escape her words, I didn't know anymore. I started going to a veterans support group at a community center, not because I wanted to talk, but because I needed to hear other voices. People like me who'd seen things done, things carried things. One guy, Tom, a Vietnam vet with a gravelly voice, told me, "You can't run from family, but you can't let them break you either." I nodded, but I didn't know what it meant for me. Then one day in March, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Ruth, the woman from the big house. She said she'd found a box of old military photos in her attic and thought I might want to see them. I didn't know why she called me, but I said yes. When I got to her house, she had the box open on her kitchen table. The photos were faded but clear: soldiers in Korea, in Vietnam, in places I recognized from stories. One photo stopped me cold. It was a woman in a nurse's uniform holding a soldier's hand, her face tired but determined. Ruth said, "That's my aunt. She never talked about the war. But she was proud." I looked at the photo and saw myself. Not the me now, but the me from Kandahar. The me who didn't break. Ruth made tea, and we talked. Not about the photos, but about life. I told her about Christian, about Leo, about leaving. I didn't tell her about Carol, but I didn't need to. Ruth listened, and when I was done, she said, "You're not running. You're surviving. But surviving isn't living." I didn't know what to say, so I just thanked her and left. That night, I dreamed of Kandahar. The bombs, the blood, the soldier in my arms. I woke up gasping but not afraid. For the first time, I felt something like strength. I decided to call Christian. Not to go back, but to hear his voice. I used a payphone at a gas station, my hands cold around the receiver. He answered on the second ring. "Mom." His voice was raw, like he'd been crying. I said, "It's me." He started talking fast, asking where I was, begging me to come home. I listened, my heart aching. He said Leo missed me. He said he didn't understand why I left. He said Carol was sorry. That stopped me. Sorry for what I asked. He hesitated, then said, "She told me what happened. In the kitchen. And at your house. She didn't mean it, Mom. She was stressed." I closed my eyes. Stressed. That was her excuse. I said, "Christian, I love you. I love Leo. But I can't come back. Not now." He started to argue, but I hung up before he could. I stood by the payphone, the wind biting my face. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just done. I went back to my motel and packed my bag. Duluth wasn't home. Minnesota wasn't home. I didn't know where home was, but I knew I had to find it. I checked out the next morning and got in my car. The road stretched out again, endless and cold. I drove south this time. No plan, no destination, just motion. I ended up in Iowa, a small town called Fairfield, where the fields stretched forever and the people didn't ask too many questions. I rented a room in a boarding house run by a woman named Clara, who cooked breakfast every morning and left me alone the rest of the time. I got a job at a diner washing dishes, $60 a day under the table. The work was mindless, but it kept me moving. I didn't talk much to anyone, just did my job and went back to my room. But the past followed me. It always does. One night, I was wiping down counters at the diner when a customer left behind a newspaper. I don't know why I picked it up, but I did. There was an article about a veterans parade in Minneapolis. The photo showed a woman in her 70s, holding a flag, her army uniform still crisp. The caption said her name was Linda, and she'd served in Desert Storm. I stared at the photo, my fingers smudging the ink. I saw myself in her. Not just the uniform, but the way she stood, proud but tired, like she carried something no one else could see. I folded the paper and took it home. That night I pulled out the letter I'd written to Christian, the one I'd mailed from Duluth. I hadn't kept a copy, but I remembered every word. I wondered if he'd read it. I wondered if he'd shown it to Carol. I wondered if Leo ever asked about me. The questions ate at me, but I didn't call. I couldn't. Instead, I started writing again. Not letters, but stories. About the army, about Kandahar, about the soldiers I'd saved. I wrote on cheap notebooks from the dollar store, my handwriting messy but steady. It wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. Clara noticed the notebooks one morning when she brought me coffee. She didn't pry, just said, "You've got a lot to say, don't you?" I shrugged, but she kept talking. She said her brother was a vet too. Vietnam didn't talk much, but wrote poetry until he passed. She said writing saved him for a while. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. But her words stuck. I kept writing every night after my shift, the words pouring out like they'd been waiting years to escape. One day, I was at the diner when a man came in wearing a VFW cap. He was old, maybe 80, with hands that shook when he held his coffee. I don't know why, but I talked to him. I said I served too. Army logistics. He looked at me, his eyes sharp despite his age. Where, he asked. Kandahar mostly, I said. He nodded like that was enough. We talked for an hour about the army, about the things you don't forget. His name was Frank, and he'd been in Korea. He said, "You don't leave the war behind. You just learn to carry it." I thought about that for days. Frank started coming to the diner every week. We'd talk when it was slow me leaning on the counter, him sipping coffee. He told me about his kids, how they didn't understand what he'd been through. I told him about Christian, not everything, but enough. He said kids don't see us. They see the mom who makes dinner, not the soldier who saved lives. I nodded, my throat tight. He was right. Christian never saw me. Not really. And Carol made sure of it. One night, Frank brought me a flyer for a veterans writing workshop in Des Moines. He said you should go. Get those stories out. I took the flyer but didn't say yes. I wasn't ready to share my words with strangers. But I kept writing. The notebooks piled up in my room, stories of bombs and blood and brothers I'd lost. Stories of Christian too, his first bike ride, his high school graduation. Stories of Leo, his laugh, his tiny hands. But never Carol. Never here. Then one day Clara knocked on my door. She said I had a visitor. I froze. No one knew I was here. I followed her downstairs, my heart pounding. It was Christian. He stood in the boarding house living room, his jacket dusted with snow. He looked older, tired, his eyes red like he hadn't slept. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke. I didn't move. I didn't know how to. Clara left us alone, and we stood there, the silence heavy. He spoke first. "I've been looking for you for months. I traced your letter to Duluth, but you were gone. Then I found a receipt in your house with this address. I didn't ask how he got in my old house. I didn't want to know." I said, "Why are you here, Christian?" He stepped closer, his hands out like he wanted to hug me but didn't. "Because you're my mom. Because Leo needs you. Because I need you." I shook my head. "You have Carol. You don't need me." He flinched like I'd hit him. "Carol told me everything he said." "She was wrong, Mom. She knows it. She wants to apologize." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Apologize? For what? For calling me a babysitter? For making me feel like nothing? Christian's face crumpled. She didn't mean it. She's been under pressure at work with Leo. I cut him off. Stop. Just stop. I don't want her excuses. He stared at me, his eyes wet. What do you want then? For me to choose because I can't do that? I looked at him, my son, my boy, and felt the weight of everything. I don't want you to choose, I said. I just want to be seen. He stayed for an hour, begging, pleading, promising things would be different. I listened, but I didn't budge. I couldn't go back. Not yet, maybe not ever. When he left, he hugged me and I let him, but it felt empty. He said, "I'll call you. Please answer." I didn't promise anything. After he was gone, Clara brought me tea and said, "Family's hard. But you're harder." I didn't know if she meant it as a compliment, but I took it. I went to the writing workshop in Des Moines. Not because I wanted to, but because Frank's words echoed in my head. I took my notebooks and sat in a room with 10 other vets, all of us carrying something. We read our stories out loud, our voices shaky but strong. When it was my turn, I read about Kandahar, about the soldier in my arms, about the bombs. The room was quiet when I finished. A woman across from me, a Gulf War vet, said, "You're a hero." I shook my head. "I'm just Michelle." But for the first time, I felt like maybe that was enough. I stayed in Fairfield another year. The diner, the boarding house, the notebooks, they became my life. @eravouse.com. I wasn't happy exactly, but I was steady. I talked to Frank every week, his stories grounding me. I wrote every night, my stories growing longer, sharper. I even started sending them to veterans magazines, small ones that paid $20 for a piece. They published 3 of my stories, and seeing my name in print felt like a small victory. Not over Carol, not over Christian, but over myself. Christian called every month. I answered sometimes. He'd talk about Leo's school, about his job, about life. He never mentioned Carol, and I didn't ask. He sent me photos of Leo in the mail, a new one every few weeks. Leo on a swing. Leo with a puppy. Leo in a Halloween costume. I kept them in a box under my bed, looked at them when I needed to, remember why I kept going. But I didn't go back. Minnesota felt like another life, one I wasn't ready to face. Then, one day in June, I got a letter from Christian. Not a phone call, not a photo, but a real letter. It was short but heavy. He said Leo was sick. Not bad, but enough to scare them. He said Leo kept asking for me. He said, Mom, I know you need space, but he needs you. Please. I read it 10 times, my hands steady but my heart racing. Leo. My grandson. The one piece of my heart I couldn't leave behind. I called Christian that night. He answered on the first ring. Mom, I said, tell me about Leo. He told me everything, a fever that wouldn't break tests at the hospital, doctors who weren't sure. He said Leo was home now but weak. He said he keeps saying he wants Grandma's cookies. I closed my eyes picturing Leo's face. I said I'm coming. Christian started to cry on the phone, something he hadn't done since he was a kid. Thank you, he said. I didn't say anything. I just hung up. I packed my bag that night, my notebooks, my photos, my life in Fairfield. Clara hugged me goodbye and said, You're doing the right thing. Frank gave me his old VFW cap and said, Wear it proud. I drove north the next morning, the Iowa fields giving way to Minnesota's lakes. I didn't know what I was walking into. I didn't know if Carol would be there, if she'd apologize, if she'd smirk. I didn't care. This was for Leo. When I got to Christian's house in St. People's, Paul, it was evening, the sky pink and gold. Christian opened the door before I could knock. He hugged me tight, his arms shaking. He's upstairs, he said. I nodded and went up, leaving my bag by the door. Leo was in his bed, small and pale, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. Grandma, he said, his voice weak but happy. I sat on the edge of his bed and held his hand. I heard you wanted cookies, I said. He grinned and nodded. I stayed with him until he fell asleep, his hand still in mine. Christian was in the kitchen when I came down. He looked at me like he was afraid I'd leave again. Thank you for coming, he said. I nodded but didn't sit. Where's Carol, I asked. He hesitated, then said, She's at her mom's rated. She thought it'd be better if she wasn't here. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We talked about Leo, about the doctors, about what came next. He didn't ask me to stay, and I didn't offer. But I knew I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I stayed in their guest room that night, the house quiet except for Leo's soft breathing upstairs. I didn't sleep. I thought about Kandahar, about the soldiers I'd saved, about the ones I couldn't. I thought about Christian, about the boy. He was the man he'd become. I thought about Leo, about the life he still had ahead. And I thought about Carol. Not with anger, but with clarity. She'd never see me. Not the way I needed her to. And that was okay. I didn't need her to. Leo got better over the next few weeks. The fever broke the tests, came back clean. I stayed in St. Point. Paul baking cookies, reading stories, taking him to the park when he was strong enough. Christian watched me like he was waiting for me to disappear. One day he said, Mom, I'm sorry. For everything. I looked at him, my son, my heart. I know, I said, but it's not enough. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Carol came back after a month. I was in the kitchen when she walked in. She looked at me, her eyes wary. Michelle, she said. I nodded but didn't smile. Carol, I said. She didn't apologize. She didn't smirk. She just said, thank you for being here for Leo. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I picked up my bag and walked out. Christian followed me to my car, his face torn. Where are you going? He asked. I don't know, I said. But I'll call. He hugged me, and I let him. Then I drove away. I didn't go back to Fairfield. I didn't go back to Duluth. I drove west this time through North Dakota into Montana, the mountains rising like a wall I couldn't climb. I stopped in a town called Bozeman, found a room to rent, and a job at a hardware store stocking shelves for $50 a day. It wasn't home, but it was enough. I kept writing my stories now about Leo, about Christian, about the road. I sent them to magazines, to veterans groups, to anyone who'd listen. Some got published. Some didn't. It didn't matter. They were mine. Christian called every week. I answered every time. He told me about Leo's school, about his new soccer team, about the puppy they got. He told me Carol was trying to be better. I listened but didn't ask about her. I sent Leo letters with small drawings of trucks and dinosaurs. He sent me drawings back, stick figures of me and him holding hands. I kept them on my fridge, the only color in my small room. One day I got a package in the mail. It was from Christian. Inside was my Veteran of the Year medal, the photo from Kandahar, the picture of Leo from his first birthday. There was a note. "Mom, these belong to you. Always." I held the medal, my fingers tracing the engraving. I looked at the photo from Kandahar, my younger self staring back. I smiled at Leo's picture, his toothy grin. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I joined a veterans group in Bozeman. We met every Thursday at a community center, swapping stories over coffee. I read my stories out loud, my voice steady now. They listened, nodded, clapped. One woman, a Iraq vet named Sarah, said, "You should write a book." I laughed, but the idea stuck. I started working on it nights after my shift, the words coming slow but sure. It wasn't just about the war. It was about family, about love, about losing and finding yourself. It was about me. A year later, I got a call from Christian. He said Leo wanted to see me. He said they'd drive to Bozeman if I was okay with it. I said yes. They came in July, the mountains green and alive. Leo ran to me when he saw me, his arms wide. I hugged him tight, my heart full. Christian hugged me too, his eyes wet. Carol was there, but she stayed back. She didn't speak, and neither did I. We didn't need to. We spent the weekend together, hiking in the mountains, eating ice cream, telling stories. Leo held my hand the whole time, his chatter filling the silence. Christian watched us, his face soft. On the last day he said, "Mom, I want you to come home." I looked at him, my son, my boy. "I am home," I said. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. They left on Sunday. I stood in the parking lot watching their car disappear. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel lost. I felt whole. I went back to my room, my job, my writing. I kept sending stories out, kept reading at the veterans group, kept living stories out. The book grew page by page, a piece of me in every word. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'll ever go back to Minnesota, if I'll ever see Carol's smirk again, if I'll ever forgive her. I don't know if Christian will ever fully understand, but I know I'm Michelle. I know I saved lives in Kandahar. I know I raised a son who loves me. I know I have a grandson who draws me stick figures. And I know I'm enough. The road is still out there, endless and cold. But I'm not running anymore. I'm walking my own path, my stories in my hands, my heart steady. And that's enough. If this story hit you, check out the next one on your screen. Click subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming. Thanks for being here.